Hello and welcome to today's episode, which is about photo essays and picture stories. My name is Mekhala Deva and I'm an independent broadcast media professional. Photo essays and picture stories are narratives where it's not words but pictures that communicate the drama of life in all its facets. They tell a story, whether the theme is Indian architecture or a roundup of last year's events. Photo essays are often mistaken for picture stories, and although they are similar, there is a distinct difference between the two. Photo essays tend often to have more than 10 pictures, usually take a much longer period to do, weeks, months or even years, often depict concepts or themes like poverty, pollution, etc. Include the photographer's personal point of view as an integral part of the essay. Often are designed for publication by or under the influence of the photographer. Picture stories appear in blocks of 4 photographs, take less time to do, often just a few hours, work within the limitation of photographer time and magazine or newspaper space. They are usually inspired by personal knowledge, minor and major stories in newspapers and magazines, press releases sent to newspapers and magazines, television, internet and radio reports. The first 70 years of the 20th century saw the origin and growth of photo essays and picture stories. In the early 20th century, Germany, France and England were hotbeds of avant-garde picture magazines. The trend moved to United States in the 30s, where general interest picture-oriented magazines like Life, Collier's, the Saturday Evening Post and Look became popular the world over and supported the dazzling careers of photographers like W. Eugene Smith. In India, picture stories and photojournalism came of age with magazines like the Illustrated Weekly of India, India Today and Outlook. But often it's a single picture that sticks in public memory. Pablo Bartholomew's picture of the half-buried baby in Bhopal in 1984 has become an iconic visual representation for the gas tragedy even 30 years later. It won the World Press Photo of the Year award. However, in this episode, we will delve deeper into the photo essay and what it stands for. And periodically, we will refer to the work of some of India's best-known photographers, including Pablo Bartholomew, who is amongst the top photojournalists of the world of all time. A photo essay is a series of images which gel, which say more about the subject collectively than individually, and which also work well together. Eugene Smith, the great photojournalist who specialized in photo essays during and after his tenure with Life magazine, stressed the importance of the interrelationship of individual pictures, as is evident in his famous photo essay, Country Doctor. When you are making a sequence of photographs about the subject, it is often possible to be more creative in your compositions, making them more abstract or evocative. You can also afford to focus attention on smaller details. This involves using different viewpoints to produce long shots, medium range and close-ups. You can change lenses to give you broad views of a scene as well as isolated details. You can experiment with light to bring out the tones, texture, shapes and form in the photographs. In this way, a photo essay allows you to build up a composite image which is often more telling than a single photograph. Today, it's books that are the main repository for contemporary photo essays, since they demand considerable time and space. Photo essays published in book form, which made waves in the 70s, was the poignant theme photo essay Minamata by W. Eugene Smith and Aileen Smith. Published in 1975, this is the story of the people of a Japanese fishing village on a mercury-polluted bay. Another fine example of a theme essay is Donna Ferrato's 1991 book about domestic violence against women, called Living with the Enemy. In India, photographic treatises on single themes range from books on the Ganga, the Himalayas to Indian monuments. Amit Pasricha, a panoramist photographer for the last decade, claims the Indian photographer has finally shed the influences associated with the Western worldview of India.
He has developed a style in which he has interpreted India in a more contemporary and a more Indian fashion, which is, in a way, he has lost this foreign sensibility of seeing, poverty in a glorified way, of seeing the cow on the street and such cliches, the temple, the sadhu, and focus more on the actual condition of the way an Indian interprets India. In my Spiritual India book, in fact, I have tried to steer clear of these very cliches that I speak of. So instead of photographing, big festivals, I focused instead on little rituals in little known places. And these rituals, which are in fact actually the backbone of our spiritual being, are enacted on a daily basis and often ignored.
In advertising photography, you sell the effect that a subject creates to lure people to buy it. In art photography too, you often manipulate aspects of the subject to create an illusion. On the other hand, in documentary photography, which is the backbone of the photo essay, picture taking is done with the primary intention of informing about reality in an objective and truthful way. Documentary photography was common in the 19th century when all sorts of subjects were pictured: landscapes, still lifes, architecture, industrial progress, etc. While some documentarians intentionally used creative compositional techniques, including lighting, to attract viewers, the predominant trend, particularly in the United States, was more straightforward photographing with no effects. American documentary photographers emphasized people more than their European counterparts, who tended to embrace form, the form of a building or of a bridge, where composition was as important as the subject. Social documentary photography in the 19th century was done with the purpose of social change. Jacob Riis, who was a New York police reporter and a regular visitor to the city's slums, was appalled by the living conditions of its people. Without formal training, Riis used the camera to take pictures so that people who saw them would share his concern. His photographs culminated in the 1890 book, How the Other Half Lives. He is now counted amongst the famous social documentarians of the 19th century. In Europe, the upheavals of the two world wars in the 20th century gave rise to a photographic tradition dealing with the social issues of the time. And in America, at the same time, social documentary photography also served as a propagandist tool. The documentation of rural America, which was suffering from adverse weather conditions and the Depression economy in the 1930s and 1940s, is a striking example. Its underlying purpose was to help justify President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs to aid rural America. Another influential social documentary photographer was Lewis Hines, who was a sociologist and came from a working-class background. Hines' pictures of children at work in brutal circumstances were a factor in the passage of national child labour laws. In India, internationally renowned photographer Pablo Bartholomew is described as, and I quote, one of the earliest photographers to realize and expose social circumstances within an existential continuum as figures of abjection, alienation, intransigence and struggle. His reach expands from gentle dereliction to harsher realities." Unquote.
I am a people photographer, so it's a matter of being able to understand psychology of people and be able to look at them within spaces, whether their own spaces or external spaces, and be able to work with them. So that's really the challenge. And I think you need to have an affinity. You know, if you are uncomfortable in public spaces with people, then obviously it's going to be a challenge. But the whole idea is to be as invisible and be able to be an observer, yet have a kind of humanist feeling where you look at people not judge them because of their economic category or their class category or whatever, but just as human beings. How people then look at it later on, and that's what I think any visual work does, is that it's open to, and why visual, but any artistic work, to many, many different interpretations.
Pablo's photo essay on morphine addicts at the tender age of 19 won him the World Press Photo Award in 1975. More recently, his photo essay on Chinese workers at Tangra, Calcutta, shows a lifelong engagement with the underdog and the underprivileged.
Well, I've always been interested in the marginal, and I think the Chinese community is here in India one of the marginalized groups of people because of the way we have alienated them because of the 1962 India-China war. There was a confrontation and we were the losing end of that confrontation, and thereby I think the Chinese community suffered politically very hard, and somehow I've always felt, I think, a kind of affinity with that group in people.
But the most interesting and valuable function of photography is in preserving accurate records of the past. Museums and art galleries the world over have historic photographic records of the past, and the majority of these are of ordinary people, not earth-shattering events. In portraying people and their environment, the type of portrait used is different from the traditional face shot. The person is smaller in the frame, and the background is crucially important in the way the viewer reads the pictures. The environments in which we see the subjects say something about them, where they live or work, or they make a statement about the type of people they are. A wide-angle or standard lens is most popular for this type of portraiture. Photojournalists often use 21 or 24 mm lenses, as images from these very wide-angle lenses look dramatic on the page. But there is a possibility for distortion at the edges. Photographers like Henri Cartier-Bresson, Robert Capa, and W. Eugene Smith are known for their images of the lives of ordinary people. However, to do this well, the photographer must gain the trust of subjects and work with them to tell their story. Pablo's documentation of the head-hunting Naga tribe is a success story, not just for having traversed in the 90s a generally inhospitable region, but also in reaching out to a remote community to present to the world its customs and traditions.
Photography is principally a matter of access. How you build that access is the key to many of the things that you can be successful at. So the Naga project, which is a self-assigned project, was something that I did over a 10-year period. So within this period, I had to be able to build access, find the places that I needed to go to, what these places had in them. So the picture of the Skull Hut is one of these situations where I had to do my research, logistically figure out how I was going to get there at the right time, meet with the people, and then be able to photograph what I needed to do. But to see the Skull Hut was a wonderful find, in that sense, to sort of know the power of that animist tradition.
Changes in society are so rapid and far-reaching that they can provide a stimulating project for a photographer, exploring the developments that take place in his locality. In Delhi, Ram Rahman has been commissioned by the Aga Khan Trust to document the momentous restoration of Humayun's tomb.
Importance of documenting this photographically is manifold, because first you photograph the building as it is before any restoration begins, say 3 years ago, without any intervention being made. Then you photograph it as it is slowly being repaired, when the stone is being taken out or a new stone is being carved and put in. And there are a number of reasons for doing that, and the importance is, first, you have a record of the monument as it was, say at some point in history. Then you photograph what you are doing to it at that point, so that in the future, if there is any issue with the work that was done, because this is a many hundreds of years old building, you have a record of exactly what was done. And if it needs to be redone or changed or brought back to a certain stage, you can always do that. Besides which, to do detailed work like this on a monument of the scale of Humayun's tomb, in a way, it is a portrait of the building. And by making pictures of bits and pieces of the building, in a way, you're making a portrait of the full character of this building, which is a great building. It is one of the great buildings of world architecture.
A photo essay could be on a factual subject, or it could be on a far more abstract subject, like an essay on a feeling or emotion like happiness or loneliness. Some of the more popular photo essays have been on a favorite place or a particular landscape or a location whose interest is motivated by the human activity around it, like a public park or a harbour. It is easier to take natural and spontaneous shots of people when there's lots of activity and one's potential subjects are preoccupied. Since the 1970s, a strong theme in photography has been the urban and rural landscape. In Germany, Bernd and Hilla Becker have produced large format images on industrial subjects like water towers and coal mining. In Britain, Martin Parr's work has centered on the shopping malls of Britain and the tourist industry abroad. How do you choose a subject for a photo essay? It depends on what subject interests you and is visually stimulating. Good travel photography, for instance, depends on a more detailed and perceptive approach. Personal observations and experiences can give viewers a greater sense of a place than just taking pictures of landmarks. In photographing cities, for instance, to give the photographs a sense of place, what sort of things should you look for? The photographer's own interests are a good starting point.
I wanted to capture that life of the city, which is not just buildings or monuments, but the life of the people. This is during Ramzan, before Eid, in Matya Mahal in Old Delhi. And these are very consciously thinking about the medium of photography, because there's a whole tradition of street photography. The reason that I was interested in photographing this is because, this is one of the only urban parts of the city of Delhi, which is very dense. People live upstairs, they have shops downstairs. It's a very crowded and very lively part of the city. And during Ramzan, this is in the Muslim area, after fasting the whole day, the people come out, the entire family comes out at night, and they're all in their finest new clothes with the babies and uncles and cousins, etc. And it's very, very festive. And the street life is amazing in this part of the city at that time. Because after all, much of what a city is about is the people. So this is what these pictures were about. And also in terms of making these pictures, these of course are also documents, because you see how people dress, the kinds of clothes that they wear, the styles change. Here you've got plastic flowers. Many years before that you wouldn't have had plastic flowers. The kinds of pillowcases, etc., they all change in style. More and more people are wearing ready-made shirts. In 10, 15 years ago, people would have their kurtas and their shirts stitched for themselves. Now you see more ready-made clothes. So the little details like this are what interest me in the photograph. Also, these signs which used to be hand-painted have now become digital. They've got backlighting, etc. So these are the little documents, details which the photograph can document.
In Outside In, A Tale of Three Cities, Pablo Bartholomew's approach in documenting Delhi, Calcutta and Bombay in the 70s is unique. But as Pablo points out, that is what documentary photography is about. You document the time and the spaces that you photograph.
The Tale of Three Cities has really come about from like a teenage diary, which is as I grew up from my mid-teens, looking into the places and the people, the family, friends around me, and trying to sort of document their lives and mine at a particular time as I was growing up. At that time, for example, there were only incandescent light bulbs. Even tube lights were not so common, or now what is very common, the power-saving CFL bulbs. None of this sort of lighting was there. So what you find is very dark spaces with one source of illumination. It could also be in natural light where you have lighting coming through windows or doorways. So it has a different sense to how maybe fluorescent tube lights light up space. So, you know, all of that kind of has its own way of being able to speak and talk to people. Like when somebody photographs now and then people look at it 20 years after, then there will be visual clues which will sort of typify the year 2011 or this period of the new millennium.
In photographing cities, a lot of photographers choose to focus on landmarks. The key to photographing buildings and settings is a choice of viewpoint and also showing the building in the context of its surrounding. In a photo essay, focusing attention on details of a building in a series of images is often more revealing than a single photograph. Using a long focus lens would enable you to isolate a small area of the subject from a distant viewpoint. Using a tripod would ensure sharp images and aid precise framing. Basic visual elements of texture and pattern, color and form are the key to successful pictures of architectural details. Amit Pasricha's approach in photographing Indian monuments for his book Monumental India, voted amongst the top 10 books in the year 2008, was quite different.
Using the panoramic technique and standing fairly close to the monument, I created these large, huge panoramic images of the monument in their surroundings. For instance, in this picture of India Gate, which in fact I shot from a fire brigade ladder, standing 40 meters up in the air at the level of the top of India Gate. I couldn't really picture the picture till I had my ladder, and I had only one shot to make this picture. So I had to choose the time right, I had to choose the place right, but my idea was to create that same lithographic effect that I spoke of, which is, you know, the Daniel effect.
A photograph captures in a fraction of a second an isolated moment in its subject's existence, giving viewers a slice of life. But a series of images can be used in a time lapse to depict phases or facets of a subject over a period of time, which could be a time lapse of a day or even a year. The time lapse sequences in photographic essays can be used to convey many aspects of the subject. The life cycle of a single tree, with its leaves changing color with the seasons or falling and then budding again, is an obvious example. Capturing the course of a river is an interesting example of time sequence photography, as the camera traces its flow through the changing topography of the region. Photographer Sanjeev Seth's treatise on the river Ganga is full of images of people, places, rituals and social phenomenon, and what is common to all of these is that it's the Ganga which flows through them right from its emergence from the Himalayas through the Sundarbans, where it merges with the sea at the Bay of Bengal.
It's just above the source of the river. Gomukh is somewhere here, but there are a couple of huts there. And these are the Bhagirathi peaks. The river over there is called the Bhagirathi after the peaks from where it flows. And It's a little campsite where people had a little fire, and I caught the last light on the Bhagirathi peaks. And this, of course, is Shivling. This mountain is called Shivling. It's above Gomukh. This is the Gangotri glacier where the river flows out from. And this is Mount Shivling again at about 5 o'clock in the morning, first rays of light, sunrise on it. There's all sorts of life that you spot on the edge of the river. This, for example, is a mud hut, what you would call, mud sculpture almost, which was made by a sadhu. He lives underground. But this is the gate to his underground cave, and he's sculpted it with mud, and you see how aesthetic this is. When it is not that wide and not that deep, then the sandbanks come up, and they are called dyaras, and there's more than just a scramble to try and claim some rights over these dyaras and plant. In the Sundarbans, of course, you know about the tigers, which turned to become man-eaters because of the lack of any other produce that they could eat, any other game, but also apparently, there are these theories which abound that the salinity of the water irritates them, and they also move very quickly towards anything that they see which encroaches on their way. But the people who live there, when they move into the Sundarbans, into the mangroves, into the forest for bees or whatever, honey or whatever else, they pray to Ban Bibi, who is the guardian of the forest, and they pray at little shrines like this, where you see the Manush in the protection of the deity, and her own man keeping the tiger away. So usually the prayers happen here before you move into the forest. And then, of course, the river meets the sea. You could shoot this anywhere, but this is at Gangasagar. It teaches you, it changes you. If you leave the artist behind and carry the pilgrim with you, your life changes. You learn as much as you actually are trying to expose through your photography.
But there are subjects that are popular material for photo essays, like the sea, for example, because of its ever-changing nature. As the light from the sky is reflected in the moving water, there is a wide range of tones and colors which shift and change by the second. The rhythm of the waves changes at high tide and low, and photographing these movements would create a wide range of effects, from the soft and subtle to the dark and wildly dramatic. Rocks, ripple sand and breakwaters, a boat or person can be included in the image to heighten the sense of depth and distance. Thus, you could build a composite image of the sea by a variety of compositions reflecting the changes in lighting, shapes and lines, textures and colors. No matter how interested you are in the subject you are photographing, you must be ruthless when editing your pictures. If there are several pictures showing more or less the same thing, you should keep just one and reject the others. And if a good picture simply doesn't fit in with the others, it's best to reject that too, so that you stay focused on the subject and its related details. Often a good photo essay accompanied by some informative text can give you the whole picture without writing an article on the subject. Most of us love to photograph the familiar and the unusual. We begin with activities around our family and friends and graduate to recording experiences of other people in our journey through life. If you were to go through your personal albums, you will realize that there is an untrained photojournalist or photo historian in many of us. That's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and are inspired to explore your surroundings with the camera. Goodbye and best of luck.